Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, and I have a guest with me today in the library studio. Is Adam Retych. Adam, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thank you, Tom, for
All right.
having me join you today. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to have a good time and a conversation, something that Adam is very impassioned about and is absolutely critical across the United States. And here in Ohio in particular, it's taken on legs that I don't think a lot of people ever were aware of that it would again. And here we are, some interesting research that Adam has done. But before we get going on that, I wanted to kind of come back for a moment from my friend Melancton Smith. And as we have had in the last two programs, and the things that have been happening this past week in particular on the spending bill, the wall, all the various things that we keep seeing going on. And now that Congress, both with the Republicans on the House and the Senate, obviously is gone. And we're not going to accomplish all the things that we were hoping to have accomplished and were promised to accomplish. But it was predicted. It was absolutely predicted. If we go back to Melancton Smith and what he was talking about on that June 25th time period, Adam, that was real interesting is that he was talking about corruption in Congress and the cabals that would come about and happen. And he was going back and forth with a couple of people, and this was during the New York Convention of the Constitution when it was being ratified.
Okay.
And by the time that New York was into that ratification, fundamentally the Constitution was ratified by other states.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going through the exercise, but what was important was that they were trying to press for amendments. And then the amendments that he was pressing on was around the Senate in particular, and he was a proponent, and the amendment that was offered was that there would be term limits on the Senate. And one of the things that came about is that more than one of the gentlemen have ridiculed my apprehension of corruption in the Senate. That was one of the reasons he was looking at that. And he goes on to say, how, say they, are the people to be corrupted? By their own money? Sir, in many countries, the people pay money to corrupt themselves. Why should it not happen in this? Certainly, the Congress will be as liable to corruption as other bodies of men. Have they not the same frailties and the same temptations? With respect to the corruption arising from the disposal of officers, meaning he talked about the bureaucracies and how they would be corrupted. He goes on to say that the gentlemen have treated the argument as insignificant. But let anyone make a calculation and see whether there will not be good offices enough to dispose of to every man who goes there, who will then freely resign his seat as either a congressman or as a senator, so that he resigns his seat. For can anyone suppose that a member of Congress would not go out and relinquish his $4 a day job for £2,000 or £3,000 a year? And he just continues on with that. And it was interesting because what happened was that you have Melancton Smith talking about this idea that people could be bribed with their own money. And we see that happening in Congress all the time. That's what's happened in a lot of the different legislation that goes out there, all the different special interest groups. All of that is that Congress goes, oh, yeah, Adam, what is it you really like? Well, how can I help you get that? Oh, okay. And next thing you know, is the special interest groups throws their money at it. It comes back around because they get the special favors and all these various things. So it becomes extremely interesting that it was predicted then. And then de Tocqueville, he wrote about that. You may have read that. I'm not sure, but he may have read it or heard of it. Is that's one of the things that de Tocqueville said that in 1850 is that America will remain great until Congress realizes that the people can be bribed with their own money. So it's something that, is out there, which kind of brings us to what you're going to talk about. And we're going to have this conversation on. So we're going to have a conversation in education that's on this item that is moving across the country, is becoming extremely prominent here in Ohio. Its acronym is SEL, and that's for social emotional learning. Social emotional learning. I did some research, but Adam, give us just a blurb on SEL from its definition, and then give us a little bit more information about yourself and how you got involved in this topic.
Well, thank you again, Tom. If I can just say, SEL, social and emotional learning, is a very complicated situation that our state finds itself in currently. And like most complicated situations, it demands a complicated solution. So SEL can be best understood through the 5 W's, in which I comprehend as who, what, where, when, and why. And then finally, how we can mitigate some of the damages that it has already done and is projected to do. But before I'll get to that, I'll just remind you that my name is Adam Retych. I am a...
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I always say it different.
Well,
so
as
thank you.
most
As
people
novelists,
do.
people get that kind of wacky too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All the time.
Yeah.
The time. And I'll give you credit because you're closer than most. You're closer to most.
Yeah.
So over the past year, I've had the privilege and honor to intern with Sarah Fowler. She serves the 7th District on the Ohio State Board of Education. I helped her on some of her campaign work, which entailed research, and in particular on the SEL issue, which will be argued on the board this upcoming year, and is one of the primary reasons why Sarah Fowler is serving on the board, to fight for families and for the freedom of local control, which consequently is the exact thing that SEL is trying to abolish and replace in Ohio. So as it has done in 25 other states, which we'll talk about soon. So this is something that touches very home for me, and actually for all of us, as this will be discussed this upcoming year, 2019, and subsequent years up until 2024. So this is a very prevalent problem and something that will be addressed.
So
and
how is it so pressed to you? What draws your heart to it, and looking at it and looking at the solution possibilities? What's your background that takes and says, well, this is something I got to jump on?
And that's a great question, Tom. My personal background, home educated. I was home educated, classically educated, up until actually my senior year, all the way through. Also, I had the privilege to participate in a career center, a vocational school, where I learned architecture and project management for 2 years. So, which was a public school environment. So I benefited from kind of the both worlds experience. But my experience with the family and with just multiple volunteer organizations and some of their impacts, as well as the church and other mediating institutions, has really impacted my perspective on this issue. And as soon as I was involved with Sarah and heard her perspectives on SEL, social and emotional learning, and more importantly, the mission of CASEL, which we'll talk about sooner, the promoters of SEL, and how their goal is to diminish the role of the family, volunteer organizations, and the church in the lives of school children and the next generation, and even from your perspective, the next generation of citizens, that I saw a need to get involved and to be more informed.
Excellent. It becomes extremely critical. This isn't anything new, for a lot of you that are listening and in all the various markets. That what becomes extremely important is that there have been people that have been out there for a long period of time. Charlotte Isabit, in the work that she's done, Many of you know of her. There's a new version of her book that's out as well, Dumbing Down America. She was in the Reagan administration. I don't know if you knew that, but Charlotte is a close friend of ours, so we're like 1 degree away from her. And then also all the way back in the 60s, there were the same person, John Stormer, who wrote None Dare Call It Treason, also wrote None Dare Call It Education. And this was in the early 70s when he wrote that book. And he was already talking about a number of these things because they were coming out of the 50s and 60s based on what was happening in the educational system, what was going on with UNESCO, and a lot of that. And so this creep, if you will, with Alex Huxley and a lot of those others have been historically trying to get those footholds in that educational system. And a lot of our audience, I know, has some concept of it. But I think the important part, and where are we at, Kath? We're in 4 minutes left in this segment. So yeah, it goes fast. Yeah. It goes very fast. Is that in this next few minutes, why don't you take and bring us to some of that? Because so nationally, it's been moving. We don't have all the states have bought off on it from what I've seen on the chart, but Ohio is just taken in, and Maryland is a big market. Pennsylvania is on it. New York is all about it. Washington State is like they're all the way implemented from. And folks, just we'll get Adam to go. The important part to understand is that this is the cradle to grave item. As I've read through and Adam, can you pick up on that? I mean, they're talking about from infancy all the way through adult education.
Absolutely, and I understand we only have a couple more minutes left, 3 more minutes. And I think part of to answering that question would be analyzing who is SEL, who is social and emotional learning. It ultimately, the standards of SEL are established by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or the acronym CASEL. And over the past few years, and I'll read their mission to you, which answers your question. And from their website, they write, "Our mission is to help make evidence-based social and emotional learning, SEL, an integral part of education from preschool through high school. CASEL and our broad network of collaborators are working together to turn momentum for SEL into a national movement." So it is a national movement, and we can see right off the bat that CASEL in and of itself is an organization committed to national uniformity.
Yes.
And so the question is, do we want to be a part of that?
Yes. And just to capitalize on that as well, when I looked into some of the aspects of where CASEL's ultimate drive is on all of it is to even into the work environment. So from an adult perspective, what they want to do with the youth is that whole movement of right thinking, if you will. Mm-hmm. And as Adam's going to talk about a little bit more, some of the details of it, but also from an adult perspective, it's going into the workplace and defining that and raising up the student body to the point that then they're prepared for a workplace, as I call them, almost like gnomes. Let's go, all right, we're going to work, and we'll think this way, all of that. And so it just kind of gets to that point is that instead of having free-thinking individuals, we're going to have all these other creatures out there. I mean, is that kind of just a real quick gist on what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. And ultimately, uniformity in education does not teach academics. It teaches skills, which is something that perhaps we can learn from Marx and see where the end goal of those skills and what they want the next generation of citizens to be skilled in.
I saw a lot of that when I was down in Central America and what they were doing in the educational process. And you've heard me talk about it a lot of different times on the programs, is where they have these free trade zones inside all these different countries. And then the schools are feeders to that. And it's based on what the required skills are for the jobs that are going on inside those free trade zones. So, that's Marx. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and which is scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. It just becomes one of those really bizarre things. So ladies and gentlemen, as we're taking and looking at what is SEL for the next segment, Samuel Adams is here now today, and those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. Come on back for next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They got it right. They were so predictive. It just is amazing to me. And there's so many different things that are going on out there. And I just want to remind you that the primary, where we're at in the primary markets is with Liberty Works Radio Network. And you're obviously here and listening to it. And what I'd like you to do is to make sure that you go ahead and look at the website, libertyworksradionetwork.com or lwn.net and lwrn.net. And take and go look at the other hosts and hostesses there. They're the live programming during the week. And you know what? They have a little button there that's called Donate. This is a listener-funded network, and they sure can use your help to keep this network going. Also, for all the various things that I'm doing with Samuel Adams Returns and this program, if you want to see the YouTube video of it that comes out right after this program is finished, in the morning segment, is that if you go to samueladamsreturns.net, that's where you'll find all of the archives and everything that we're doing with Samuel Adams Returns. So with that, we have again our host, and I'm going to get it right this time, Adam Retych. Yes,
you got it.
All right. See, it takes an old dog a little while to get the tricks down, but I can learn. I can learn.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're talking about is, and we came out of that first segment, is social emotional learning, and that it's touching every aspect. And in Ohio, the big push is on for 2019 through 2024, and it's to get this thing. It's already in preschool through third grade, but they want to jam this thing all the way up into high school, potentially into the collegiate level, and even into the workspace. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. There's an organization that I found, as Adam's going to talk about all his research, is the cfchildren.org. And they just get into, they are such promoters of SEL and what they're doing. And this is so that, often taught in the classroom, social emotional learning gives tomorrow's workforce. Mm-hmm. See, this is what I was talking about the last segment, is it gives tomorrow's workforce the tools for success, while educators find it contributing to the positive school climate and increase academic success. I want to stop right there because, Adam, you mentioned in the last segment that SEL really doesn't contribute to academic success.
Well, and you're absolutely right. That is not its primary focus. They claim that it's an advantage. And it really answers the question, what is SEL? And so along those lines, if we look on the CASEL website, and I'll remind the audience, CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or the acronym CASEL. They promote the SEL, or the Social and Emotional Learning Standards. So that we are currently facing in Ohio is kind of adopting their own version and interpretation of those standards. So if you look on the CASEL website, you'll see, quote, social and emotional learning, SEL, is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage their emotions. So understanding and managing emotions, set and achieve, positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and promote responsible decisions. So
that's all good stuff, Adam.
Right, and it's almost pernicious in the respect where it's promoting these soft skills. Right, we're seeing these selling points for soft skills, and what is wrong with understanding emotions, achieving goals, and establishing goals, and show empathy for others, and maintaining positive relationships?
Kathy's trying to get me to do that all the time.
Right, and so that was the goal of my parents, right? Yeah. And so what SEL does, it establishes this curriculum through which all the studies are are taught in the framework of basically these 5 competencies as they define it. And I'll read you these competencies.
Yes.
These are fascinating.
By all means.
And what they mean by competencies, these are the criteria by which the academics is taught. And
so we're talking about teachers.
The teachers.
What they're being taught on how to implement this.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah. This is basically the standards by which Castle is expecting their teachers to portray their curriculum in the classroom. And this is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, good relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so at face value, as you picked up on, very general, very general. We don't really, at face value, it looks great. However, one thing that's really interesting, though, is Stella Morabito's, her observations on what these so-called soft skill competencies, what they really entail and what they really mean by what they say. And so I'll share with her my summary of her take on it.
Good, because a lot of people are sitting here, starting to wonder about, where are you going with this, Adam?
Right. And so, and this is basically what we're observing, looking into the system, that most people aren't picking up on when they see SEL. And so for self-awareness, the first competency, it's really assessing emotional weakness. So the student assessing their emotional weakness. For self-management, the second competency, what it really is expressing expressing feelings despite opposition. For social awareness, it's really distinguishing the similarities and differences among peers. For good relationship skills, it's really maintaining cooperation-based relationships, which may sound great, but it's really requiring the students to analyze which belief systems are compatible with their own. And then for responsible decision-making, it's practicing the standardized beliefs established by Castle's curriculum.
So when we come to that whole thing, there's nothing there about morality.
No.
Nothing about morality but the challenges to someone that would have a moral belief system would be through the processes of implementing those 5 criteria.
Correct. It's almost like a censorship in that regard, where a student, say a Christian conservative student, say an 8th grader, is in a classroom setting with other students who are trying to uphold these 5 competencies. We can see that soon that student will be isolated, ignored by both the students and their teachers because they don't align with the competencies established by Castle.
So if you take this, and I don't know that you've had the opportunity, you may have looked at the Delphi technique. Are you familiar with that? Okay, so when I listen to what you're describing here, and I go through how to implement and utilize Delphi within that group orientation, this is nothing more than a full implementation of the Delphi technique to a degree. I mean, there's more, obviously more to it that you'll explain. But when I look at all of the various things that happen out there, to me, that's like, oh, this is Delphi on steroids going across a whole social spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you hit it right on, the nail on the head. We're seeing just that students with perhaps a set of beliefs, if anything, they're encouraged to abandon them and accept the competency standards established by Castle. And so, in the name of soft skills. So
is this, why we have the safe zones out on campuses and all of that as well? That's taking that and now moving it even into that higher education. But what we're looking at for Ohio in particular right now is to take it from 3rd grade all the way through, so it'll be preschool through K-12 at the moment.
Correct. Yeah. And it's funny, well, not funny, but it's interesting to note that Castle's 2016 effort to nationalize their standards was actually quite fruitful. And in fact, 25 states, as of this April, signed up for the
Mm-hmm.
Castle standards.
Yeah.
And so servicing about 30 million students aged K through grade 12. So as you said, this is every grade and on every level.
So just where we at? 5 minutes. Kath is sitting there shaking her head as we're talking about all of this. So one of the things that you may not have looked at is that here's your birth to age 5, and some of the things that I looked at on the standards, standard statements. The child will, with the self and awareness and expression of emotion, and then there's an implementation strategy, and the teacher may. So with infants, they express a variety of emotions: contentment, distress, happiness, sadness, surprise, dislike, anger, fear, through facial expressions, gestures, movements, and sounds. So here's what the teacher does, which instead of calling a parent, they're saying what the teacher does, okay, is play games like peekaboo and follow up when to tell them to stop, when their emotions are stopped changing. Respond positively to an infant's emotions. Sing a song, chant, rhyme, poetry. To work on these emotional levels. Well, parents are doing that in a way, but if this is something that then has, and it was interesting, chant, there was no prayer or anything like that in there. But I mean, I found this where they're going through young toddlers all the way. So they're talking from birth. And that's why I said cradle to grave. So you're going birth to age 5?
Mm-hmm.
Come on. And now we have this whole thing that they're pressing in. So where are we at, Adam? What are we doing here?
So I can, what's the time? 3.5 minutes. I can share with you what specifically Ohio is thinking for the 2019 through 2024 plan that is currently being promoted by the Ohio Department of Education to service its 1.7 million students currently. If you check out the strategic plan, you'll see some of the reasoning as to why we're thinking about adopting this. And there's 3 headings. Heading 1, jobs are rapidly changing and require different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
More diverse, and then secondly, more diverse student body, or to accommodate to a more diverse student body with nuanced learning needs, which I can elaborate on that.
Yeah.
And then finally, increased student exposure to poverty and social stressors. You already touched on the first point, and so I won't go into that. But the second, to accommodate for a diverse student body, what they're really saying is that due to the inequities of increasing classroom diversity, the state must promote early learning, effective educators, safe learning environments, as you said, strong mentorship, state providing the mentorship, and career exploration to reduce achievement gaps among student groups. So my take on it is the state controlling the mentorship and career exploration to promote more uniformity. And then finally, that third point, to accommodate to students who are exposed to poverty and social stressors, is the state interprets it sees many of its students, the children, undergoing certain, as they call it, negative experiences. It observes them being economic disadvantages, homelessness, and then a compromised household. So the state sees it upon itself to accommodate and to directly impact the lives of the student, and actually totally bypassing the role of mediating institutions like the family, like the church, like volunteer organizations.
Well, that's something that we want to get into in the next segment, because I think that's really critical. And when we were looking, and you said Marxism and all of that in the first segment, is that when the state becomes predominant, that's totally against what our founders intended. And so when we drive back into looking in those mirrors of history and what was that original intent from the founders' perspective, and how we're supposed to take and educate our children, even looking back at what Samuel Adams talked about and how he promoted education, and John Adams and so on, and Madison. It's just totally different than what we're seeing from a state-driven process. So what I'd like you to do, Adam, is to hold that thought as we come back into the next segment, our final segment here on Samuel Adams Returns, because those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. And I really can't remember if I introduced myself in the first or second segment, but this is Tom Navolis, your host, and we have with us today Adam Retych, who's taken and doing a bang-up job and bringing us information about the social emotional learning. And you know what? It goes down. You people that have been parents, you don't know anything, and everybody else needs to learn how to self-comforting of infants, Adam. You have to take and be able to comfort self in a simple way and communicate needs to help through vocalization and gestures. You need to be able to understand so that you can respond in a comforting way to those infants, and you pick up a crying child. Really? Sometimes you just got to let the kid cry it out, Anyway, sure, there are familiar toys and materials in the comfortable environment, and you have to provide that soft, cozy, quiet area so that the child can take and understand the adult, and the adult can comfort the child. Well, this is from infancy on up. We're talking about what social emotional learning is. Adam has been giving us some really great ideas of what's going on in Ohio in particular, and I think we're going to try and look at a little more definition. I think is where we're going to go, a little bit more of what's being implemented, and then my question always is, it's not what the founders intended. The founders intended, obviously, for parents, not the state, to be that first relative form of government, that the family, as that family unit, to hold that together. During the break, Adam and I were talking, and let's see, I put it somewhere. Where do I have it? Here I have a book that was given to me by the author. It's called In the Presence of Our Enemies, and it's a history of the malignant effects in American schools of the UN's UNESCO and its transformation of American society from the lips of those who did it, by Ellen McClay. And it's a little book. And we were talking about at the beginning before we started that what we're seeing today is that the emotional touch points have been there for a long time. And in the UN, Alex Huxley, even with John Dewey, their ideas were to drive this from that whole separation within the families and work on the emotional side, because we can manipulate people easier from emotional, because when you start having reason and you can think for yourself, you become more difficult to control in many, many ways. And so it's just very, very interesting. And the emotional testing. So one of the things, two things I want to bring out, because one of them is relevant to what happened in 1961 that Ellen brings out, when there was a murder of a young girl in California, in a particular area outside of LA. And then next thing you know, these psychologists are doing emotional testing on kids. So relative to where we are in Northeast Ohio, there was a mass shooting in Chardon, Ohio. One of the immediate responses by the Board of Mental Health, which I happen to sit on that board now. I wasn't here at that time. But at that time, the Board of Mental Health, what did they do? They started doing psychological testing on all of the kids in the public schools here in the Chardon School District and other school districts within the Geauga County. And the parents did, as the parents did in 1961, got into an uproar about it. So as we're talking about SEL and what the state of Ohio is looking to do in its strategy, do you think that parents are going to get in an uproar, or is it so far ahead in its strategic plan that it's one of those things of the frogs in the boiling pot?
And that kind of goes into the solution of SEL. I think for the actual parents who know about the implications of this very pernicious state provided program, they would be confused at most, I mean, as to exactly how to defend their families and their freedoms against this threat. So it is, as I said, 25 states have signed on with CASEL and their program, and Ohio is projected to be next. And so what it will take, Tom, is for the families, and yes, so there will be an uproar as more information comes out, but as of now, there isn't a lot of awareness. And, with all things considered, it does look very appealing at face value. And so what it will take is, in order to get that uproar, it will take more information to come out on what it really is and what the 5 competencies really entail. And so, to answer your question, we'll see. We'll see if that information gets out.
So let's talk. As you were finishing up in the last segment, the last point that you were making was relative to the social ideas, those things that from welfare or those that are disadvantaged, either socially or economically, and all of that. So one of the places that we're seeing this actively happening is in Cleveland, Ohio, and I think that Cuyahoga County and Cleveland in particular has adopted a lot of this into the educational program. What have you drawn out? What has your research drawn anything out on
absolutely.
where what's going on there?
Absolutely. Well, I kind of summarize it in at least with what Ohio is claiming, that when the state sees a need, it automatically tries to fulfill it. And so we're seeing a need in our children, right? And we're seeing a need, for almost like progressive. We're projecting, a future need for jobs and industry jobs, and then also with improving academics and diverse environment. So the state is trying to get all its tentacles into each one of those facets and try to correct it at the young age of the students, from birth essentially to death. But in this case, from pre-K to and through 12th grade, it's trying to correct those problems right off the bat. And we ask ourselves, is that really their job?
Well, I mean, you're sitting here looking at the camera. Kathy's watching, from her little production chair over there, and I'm sitting here, and you folks that will watch the video can see me contorting. My face is just, getting into all these, bizarre looks on them, because I always look, and this is what I ask you on every program on the listening audience, is what happened to the church? What happened to our moral component? Part of a work I'm doing in another book that I'm writing on theocratic libertarianism, and that's a bizarre name for those, what we really need to be looking at, is that it was John Witherspoon, in his lectures on moral philosophy, is talking about that politics and society are indispensable of one another. And without the moral foundation, and in particular a biblical moral foundation, neither are sustainable. So what we have then, what it goes to, is that when you're reading Rutherford and Lex Rex and some of the others during the Reformation period, that becomes then the battle of, now government under this other term, and what the founders were talking about, shall we have a king?
Right.
Shall we have this over authority power, or no, are we independent republics where personal responsibility and family are the root of what generates a republic to function?
Right.
So what we're seeing here is that with the morality leaving the public square, and our biblical morality, our Reformation truth and principles that cut across society, culture, and what I call the extensibility of the gospel into everything, including work so on and so forth. What right? How dare the state to take and say, oh, we have to take care of all of that?
And specifically to go off of that point, the key aspect to self-governance is us acting on our conscience, right? Mm-hmm. And SEL, social and emotional learning, it's thought reform that tries to redirect the trajectory of the next generation's consciences. And so it's directly trying to change that perception. And so
what are they going to put into the conscience? Whose conscience are they going to place if they're trying to redirect that free thinking, as one would look at, and you can argue this in other times on natural law, the natural component that God has placed in every person? What are they trying to redirect that conscience into?
Uniformity. Put short and sweet. Even though their intention specifically may be somewhat unclear, it is clear that with the curriculum, the 5 competencies, that it promotes uniformity, not diversity of thought, despite what it argues.
Oh my goodness! This experiment was done before. Was done in Germany in the late 30s, early 40s. It was done in Russia starting in 1917, 16, 15, and on. They're still trying to do it in Cuba. They're still trying to do it. I spent a lot of time in Venezuela, Central and South America, and it's like, it doesn't work. Why do Americans think that they can do socialism and neo-communism better than those places that started it and failed? That's an interesting question. I know you don't have an answer because I don't have an answer. But some of the things where are we at on time? We got 3 minutes. So here's the interesting challenge. I think it comes down again from that. And you know what? We're going to have Adam back sometime after the first of the year, maybe based on your schedule, end of January, February, because I think you're going to get more information, more insight. And I think this is such a critical topic that we all have to be looking at it, because there's a number of things that are going to happen. And folks, this is what's going to happen, is that your school districts across the country are going to be coming out in May, because that's usually when they do, for levy increases. And there's been so many changes, especially at the national level under the new tax law, under what's happened, that it's going to be impacting the funding in a lot of the schools because of the way that small businesses are getting tax breaks, which means that there's going to be less money that's going to be going to the school districts from businesses. So they're going to have to be coming out, because these are some of the things I'm working on with the tax working group. So levies are going to be coming at you, as well as what's going to be happening at the centralized systems here. Adam, give me a 35-second wrap on where your thinking is and what needs to be done.
Okay. For 35 seconds, ultimately, it's an understanding as to how we can mitigate the effects of SEL. It's an understanding that this is a local battle as well as a state battle. The state can adopt standards based on what schools choose to accept in terms of the SEL standards, if they choose to go with them. So as for Ohio, this is something that would be mandated across the state. What we can do against this is recognize that personal investment in mediating institutions like the church, the family, and volunteer organizations is essential to preserving the consciences of the next generation and enabling those different branches to do what they do best. And so, if anything that will save this nation, it is the dinner table. And
excellent.
Really, and that just could be that.
And that's such a critical thing. Just the simplicity of being able to have conversations with your family and knowing that you can have all those various opinions, because we're supposed to be free-thinking people, but you have to bring it back into the context of the moral context, and as I always say, the extensibility of the gospel into every aspect of what we're doing. And so we need to come back and have this conversation even more, Adam. So thank you for being here today. I'm really looking forward, if you're willing to come back again sometime next year. I'd really like to pick up on this, and we'll see what's happening also with your peer group. So, ladies and gentlemen, come on back next week when Samuel Adams, he will return, and those anti-federalists, they always got it right.